The national capital finally got some reprieve from the scorching heat, but the woes of Delhi residents continue. The shocker, in fact, the biggest shocker this morning came from the Delhi airport, where one person lost his life while several others, at least 8, got injured after a portion of the roof of the Delhi airport's Terminal 1 fell on cars and taxis. Besides the roof sheet, the support beams also collapsed, damaging the cars parked in the pickup and drop area of the terminal. Union Minister of Civil Aviation Ram Mohan Naidu Kinjarappa arrived at the Delhi Airport's Terminal 1 to review the situation. The Civil Aviation Minister announced a compensation of 20 lakh rupees to the next of kin of the deceased and rupees 3 lakh each for the injured. The question really is a compensation of 20 lakh rupees enough? And is that the biggest concern that we as residents of the national capital have to go through in a country which is poised to become the third largest economy in the world? And Delhi is not alone. There have been recent infrastructure failures across several states, and these have left many questions on safety and reliability of public structures. These incidents continue to make headlines, and in the recent past, we've seen lives being claimed and several being left injured. Which are these incidents that have sparked such concern? Jog your memories back. In Jabalpur, part of a fabric canopy at Dhamma Airport's new terminal collapsed due to overnight rains, raising questions, and very serious ones at that, about the construction quality. This terminal was inaugurated just 3 months ago. It suffered damage to a government official's car parked underneath. Come back to Delhi. In southwest Delhi's Vasant Vihar, a posh locality, an under construction wall collapsed, trapping at least a few laborers inside. Rescue operations are still underway. Meanwhile, cut to Bihar. It witnessed its 4th bridge collapse in a week, disrupting connectivity between districts. Thankfully, no injuries were reported in Bihar. In Telangana, an under-construction bridge collapsed, halting the contractor-related issues. Fortunately, again, no injuries here were reported too. In Bengaluru, and Bengaluru has been privy to a lot of disruptions caused by rain. But just recently, heavy rainfall caused part of a road near the metro station construction site to cave in, snarling traffic. Similar incident took place earlier last month when a part of the road caved in due to the collapse of a structure at a metro site. These incidents highlight a worrying trend on infrastructure failures across India, leaving a big question to be answered. What measures is the government taking, or should the government be taking, both at the center and at the state level, to prevent such tragedies in the future? I've got 3 very interesting guests joining me this evening. Dr. P.S. Rana, former chairman and managing director at HUDCO. Chandrasekhar Prabhu, architect and urban development expert. And Dikshu C. Kukreja, renowned urban planner and managing principal architect, CP Kukreja Architects. Dikshu, let me start this discussion with you. What we've seen today in the national capital at Terminal 1 of the airport is not something that flyers or residents of a city want to ever see. What went wrong, according to you as an architect? And more importantly, do you think enough checks and balances are in place to ensure that timely and regular audits are done, to ensure that weather-related disruptions at least don't cause havoc like the one we saw this morning?
Well, Kartik, I have to admit that the gruesome images on the screen that I've just seen are obviously, extremely disturbing for me as an urban professional to see that when we are so proud about being part of a fastest developing economy and a country which is poised to become a developed nation, to see these kind of images and the long list that you have shared of across the country infrastructure really crumbling, it's very disturbing. And I think we need to really get at the bottom of this, that are we in sync when we talk and claim about creating world-class infrastructure with the very process of how this infrastructure is built? Right now, as we speak, the systems that we have across the country are that you're supposed to create these world-class buildings, and how you go about is selecting design companies, architects, engineers who are ready to pay, quote the lowest amount. And the same story applies to construction agencies. We still in this country go with L1 basis. The one who quotes the lowest is the contractor who gets the job. Now, in that rat race to secure projects, you can imagine that it's really a sort of bottomless pit to what these kind of people quote and get projects on. It's also ironical. I've flown out of Delhi airport literally once a week or once in 10 days, and the image that comes to my mind is Delhi's been declared for year after year the best airport in the world. So certainly these are not ingredients of a best airport in the world. So I think we need to begin from really the basics, that when we are talking about creating world-class infrastructure, we need to know how to go about doing that. And then come issues related to not just investing capex in building infrastructure, but being equally concerned about ensuring the maintenance and upkeep of these kind of buildings, bridges, etc., etc. You can't just build it once and then turn a blind eye and not make sure that there are again systems in place for continuous checks and balances on the upkeep of this infrastructure. Just like a human body needs health checks, the same way buildings and machines and bridges and infrastructure does as well.
Absolutely. So let me take this across to Dr. P.S. Rana, former CMD, HUDCO. Dr. Rana, is that the crux of the problem, that we look at L1 tenders, the lowest bidder by default gets, with obviously the basic technical qualifications in place, gets an order. Once a structure is built, we turn a blind eye to it. My question to you, Dr. Rana, is who takes ultimate responsibility for the collapse of a significant structure like a ceiling at the airport in the national capital of this country? Where does the buck stop? At GMR, the builder, at Delhi International Airport, whose job is to ensure upkeep and maintenance, or right at the top at the Ministry of Civil Aviation? Or rather, not civil aviation, perhaps urban development?
Now, let me take both the things. As it was just mentioned, that it is not only the lowest bid contract, it is also the lowest bid for consultants. That is where the quality starts. So it is both. If you have the bidding even for the construction architects and designers also, so you can imagine how much quality they will bring in. And then the lowest bid for construction. So these are the two things which our friend just mentioned. But in addition, I would add one more thing, that we say that maintenance and upkeep in the future, we have lakhs of bridges across the country, and there is no monitoring process or procedures for those. And you will be happy to know that the another organization I am associated with is Construction Industry Development Council, and we have started a new training of bridge inspectors. And the idea is that the entire inventory of all the bridges across the country should be prepared, and they should be monitored. And naturally, then you need the skilled manpower for it. So the training of bridge inspectors has already started. And the next step we are starting is the building inspectors, that so that the not only at the construction type, but even for across the life of the structure. And particularly the bridges are very sensitive. So CIDC has already started the training of bridge inspectors, and the monitoring of the bridges is being introduced with the help of the agencies who have built and who are supposed to maintain it.
Is it not too late in the day, Dr. Rana? Is it not too late in the day that after we have seen 4 bridges collapse in one singular week in a large state like Bihar, that now finally we start thinking about contracting agencies who can upkeep them and maintain them?
Yeah, that is why even the concerned agencies were not doing it. So at least we started it. Let us make it a beginning.
Okay, let's make it a beginning. Let me take this across to Chandrasekhar Prabhu.
It has already been made a beginning, and we are pursuing with the agencies who are supposed to maintain the bridges and all that, that please, we are training these inspectors, you set up these units so that you maintain your bridges, not only for the day of the construction, but even future.
Okay,
I tell you, even if the architects or designers, if you start bidding for their fee even,
Sure, valid point.
where the quality will...
Let me take this to Mr. Prabhu now. Mr. Prabhu, is there a problem with the way we approach these large-scale projects? Is the problem with hiring consultants who have a connection, presumably with those who are at the signing authority of doling out these projects? Is the problem with the whole tendering process? Why can we not give prestigious infrastructure projects to world-renowned best developers out there, best architects out there, instead of following a whole tendering process which tends to get complex, which tends to get corrupt, and after a while there are no checks and balances?
See, there are two separate things which we need to consider. One is something where the government hires the services of a contractor or a professional and gives them the job, and then the bridge, for instance, fails. That is one part of it. The second part of it is a thing like an airport, which is actually built by someone else and someone else is maintaining it. That's a separate thing altogether. In the first thing and the second thing, the common point is, I have been the president of the Maharashtra Housing and Area Development Authority and handled contracts worth hundreds of crores, in fact, thousands of crores at a time. And we know that there is a basic inherent systemic defect. The systemic defect is the kind of amount that is earmarked for a particular project. Actually, less than 60% is spent on the project. The rest goes, and we are not willing to accept the fact. We only want to blame the consultant, blame the process, say that lowest has been given. Why don't we admit that when 100 rupee has been kept aside for a project, what goes on a project is 50, maybe 55, if we are lucky 60. Where does the remaining 40 go? No one wants to talk about it because everyone wants to shove it under. We cringe at the talk of corruption, and no one wants to admit that. And that is the cruel fact. The very fact that after Chandigarh, on an international level, when we go to conferences, we have very few structures to talk about in the post-independent era.
You're right.
Just because, Corbusier did a Chandigarh or a Louis Kahn did a IIM Ahmedabad. So those are the buildings which are still spoken about. Do we not have good architects, good urban planners, good people who can generate international class buildings? We do have them. But what happens to them is they can't get into a system wherein 40% goes to bribe people. So if a good consultant has to be appointed, he has to give a cut to be appointed. If a good contractor has to be appointed, he has to give a cut to be appointed. The very who takes it is another thing which I don't want to discuss at this level. But the system is such, it's so much rotten that quality is something which is even remotely not considered. What is considered is how much am I getting? How much is a guy appointing me getting? How much is a guy appointing him getting? And how much is a guy who's finally paying for it getting? And who is the loser? The people in general. And no one talks about these problems. At all such discussions, we will land up giving some kind of excuses that, lowest tenderer and all that. Believe me, in most of the tenders, the basic, in Bombay Municipal Corporation, for instance, the tender that is given is 25 to 30% lower than what is the bare minimum.
I get your point. Mr. Prabhu. I think these are very, very valid concerns, and you're talking about why India doesn't have world-class architects. India does. So let's take it to one of them, Dikshu Kokreja, who's been listening in to you. Dikshu, Obviously, we understand that the problem is with the checks and balances not being in place. There are serious allegations that Mr. Prabhu is raising on corruption potentially. If not corruption at the highest offices, then at least down the line, there are enough instances of corruption that whatever is allocated is actually not spent on construction. But my question to you is, I know you may not want to ratify that one way or another, but my question to you is a fairly straightforward one. Are we doing a trade-off between quantity and quality? We are spending a lot of money on infrastructure development. It has been the priority of the government since 2014 to build infrastructure, build bridges, build roads, build highways. Are we building too many without really looking at the quality of the construction material, of the design, of the consultants, of the architecture, and understanding holistically whether it can take the load which it is expected to?
Kartik, that's a very good question. And I would just say that in a country as large as us, where 1/6 or almost 1/7 at least of the world's population is sitting in this country, a country which is all geared up to become a developed nation, I think the intentions are all correct and are all there. Certainly, we need this quantum of development to take place. Can we handle this quantum of development? Of course we can. We have all those resources. The problem, I would say, is the basics. First of all, let us all pledge that we will start valuing human life more than we currently do. I think in this country, the value of human life is literally nothing.
We have the value of a human life is 20 lakh rupees. We are putting a financial number on the value of life.
Right. So, there has to be zero tolerance towards these kind of grave errors that take place. There has to be an understanding that the process that is being adopted to build this infrastructure has some fundamental flaws which can actually be fixed. It's not so difficult. It's just the realization that I plead is difficult at the moment. But once the process is fixed, the talent is all here, the capabilities are all here, and we really should march towards this kind of development with the quantum, to answer your question, with the quantum that we are doing today. But that outlook, the processes, for example, and anywhere else in the world, these kind of important projects, it's paramount that you also have a health and safety engineer or an health and safety engineering team at site supervising these kind of projects. Here, where do we think about that? You think you need one civil engineer, a couple of mechanical engineers, and the projects, these big ones, can be supervised by them. So these kind of attitudes don't work. And again, I reiterate the point that, building is one thing, but maintaining is another thing altogether. Like Dr. Rana just mentioned, I think that's a very welcome step of training people to become supervisors or safety checking mechanism. But what I worry about, that is that route also going to go the way that has just been mentioned in our country, where corruption becomes the excuse that yes, you can get these annual audits done at a certain cost, at a certain price. So I think these aspects are complex, and yet I believe that the solutions are not so complex. So we need a change in our attitude, that we can't just have full page advertisements glorifying world-class infrastructure being inaugurated. We actually need to get to the bottom of it, that are we seriously creating that world-class infrastructure?
Dr. Rana, are we creating that world-class infrastructure? Because the images look beautiful, the ads splurge with so much money across dailies on a very regular basis, where you see these many kilometers of road built, this state has built, national highways and state highways, etc. But is that really what we need to do with our infrastructure?
See, as it was just discussed, let me tell you, the India Habitat Center, it was built by HUDCO in 1991. And how much the architect was paid? 4.5% as the fee. And you can see the quality of design, quality of space definition. And if you hire an architect for 1% or 1.5%, how much quality will he bring? How much, how can he afford to bring that minute?
But sir, is the problem with the architecture? Is the problem with the design, or is the problem with maintenance?
Both.
Because
you see, architecture means architecture and design are our common team.
Right.
If you don't pay them enough, and as Mr. Prabhu said further, earlier you don't pay them enough, and then out of that also, if there is a cut, then who will bear the loss?
But I want to
not,
understand from you, what are our priorities at urban development? What are our priorities? Just go ahead, build roads, build highways, build ports, build airports. I mean, we have massive targets on them. But what about seeing them through from a qualitative perspective?
If you are coming to the urban planning level, I think our biggest loss is the lack of planning itself. You know, I have been discussing with people that why can't we do the urban design and why each person had to come for a building approval, and then people say that even there he has to bribe it. You know, what is the difference between Connaught Place and then the development of Barakhamba Road and Karjan Road?
Right.
You know that is the difference in quality. If you plan,
I think some very serious allegations coming through this show that corruption, despite whatever we say that our corruption ranks have gone down, we've overall climbed up in ethical business practices. I think the message is loud and clear that corruption still seems to be a major issue, and this coming from a former CMD of HUDCO and coming from an urban planner and architect are very serious concerns that need to be tabled. But Dikshu, before we run out of time, I want to bring it back to you. There are other issues as well. I mean, we've seen bridge collapses and we've seen, the airport roof collapse today. But every time there is a little bit of a shower in a place like Delhi or a place like Bengaluru, our cities are flooded. So while building world-class infrastructure is one part of the problem, maintaining existing infrastructure to a point that you can't take one off-seasonal shower is another problem altogether. How do we fix this? Because mass migration of urban dwellers outside of these metro cities doesn't seem like a possible solution. Overnight springing up new cities which can be employment generations of the future doesn't seem like an option. How do we decongest our cities? How do we ensure that at least the basics of drainage systems continue to work? And we're talking about the national capital and India's own Silicon Valley, no less.
Yes, Kartik, I am afraid that I will not be able to completely answer in totality what you've asked. It's a complex issue. I mean, I will not be able to answer in the couple of minutes that you're probably going to have on the show for it. But nevertheless, let me just say that, in the case of Delhi, for example, and it applies to many other cities in India, that this whole aspect of multiplicity of authorities is the greatest excuse for passing the buck. So a simple problem like what you've talked about, flooding in Delhi, which has just happened today, has been a disaster. Ironically, 2 days ago, we were scrambling for water. We were pleading that Delhi is under drought.
And we don't have rainwater harvesting. And we don't have rainwater harvesting. I mean, it's the simplest, quickest way to conserve water. Just harvest the water which is falling down naturally.
Let me tell you this, that Delhi has a great topography. The soil strata of Delhi allows water harvesting to happen very well. Also, the fact that we have a lot of open space in Delhi. You have open vacant land parcels, you have parks, etc., where you can build water reservoirs to create conservation of water. This water harvesting, rainwater harvesting, we talk about how many harvesting pits are there on paper. And I'm afraid to say that in reality, there are a fraction of them actually being done. So these are issues as well. But the whole aspect is that we must have a single unified agency which has an overarching responsibility of how water management, there can be an integrated water management policy in Delhi which can be done. There are issues like lakes which used to be there acting as natural reservoirs during monsoon. They have been filled up. The drains get clogged. Right. Desilting does not happen on time. Climate change is only adding to these anomalies of intense rainfalls, etc. And what is terrible
we are yet to see the worst. And we are yet to see the worst of climate change. This is just the beginning of climate change. But before I end, just a simple one-line answer from you, Dikshu, and I'll go to other panelists also. In the present scenario of all the disasters we've seen in urban planning, where does the buck stop?
I have to say buck stops at the whole attitude of whoever is creating this infrastructure. I would say the institutions, the government bodies, the municipal bodies, which talk about creating this infrastructure, their system of creating the infrastructure is flawed, and that needs to be fixed.
Okay, so you're saying the system is to blame. You're saying the system is to blame. I'll take this across to Mr. Prabhu. Mr. Prabhu, if there was one ministry or there was one organization which was to be blamed for what is happening and where the buck must stop, which one would that be?
Simple. You don't require a rocket science for that. It will shock people, but it's very simple. The person or the agency who takes credit for these monstrosities is where the buck stops. When they want to take the credit, they jolly well should take the blame. So when infrastructure is created, you say, I created this infrastructure, I spent so much money. First of all, and as a senior professor in urban planning and architecture and architectural design, I beg to differ.
I get your point, sir.
A lot of this infrastructure doesn't even have proper aesthetics. We are just picking up things from infrastructure all over the world and cutting, pasting. Cutting, pasting is not good architecture.
Absolutely. No cutting, pasting. It has to be designed exactly to the requirements of what that project demands.
But
Dr. Rana, final one word. Dr. Rana, final one word answer from you. Does the buck stop with the originator of the project who takes credit for it, or should it go all the way up to the Ministry of Urban Affairs?
It has to be proper delegation at the city level. The city government should be one responsible for the city. The interference from the state or center should be minimal, because otherwise nobody takes, if you pass on the buck up, so naturally nobody becomes accountable. So
Right.
buck stops at this, and there should be one authority at the city.
Single authority, uniformity in decision making, and then uniformity in accountability is the word coming across from all our panelists. Dr. Rana, we're running out of time. We'd love to have your views, but I think while we've run out of time, we haven't run out of the energy on this particular subject, and we will have to keep coming back to it to really make a difference. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here with us this evening. And that's a wrap on this show. News, of course, continues right here on News 9 Live.
How do you fulfill that promise? Because ultimately expectations have to be met. If you look at the political landscape, is it really changing for women? And what is the inability of the forces that dead bodies surface but not the living people?